The Galactic Council chamber hummed with quiet murmurs, each voice dripping with a shared, unspoken fear. Humanity's rise was no longer a distant concern. It was imminent, and it threatened the delicate balance of power that had been maintained for centuries. Council members, cloaked in regal attire that symbolized their diverse home worlds, exchanged wary glances. They had watched humanity evolve, innovate, and now they saw the clear danger. Humans were advancing far too quickly. Their technological prowess, their hunger for exploration, and, most troublingly, their ability to unite species under their banner was something the Council couldn't allow. One voice broke through the tension, cold and authoritative. "Captain Marcus must be dealt with." The speaker, a senior counselor with reptilian features and piercing eyes, stared around the room, daring anyone to object. Captain Marcus was the epitome of human excellence, a decorated war hero, a tactical genius, and a symbol of human resilience. His success in leading campaigns had already inspired unrest among other species oppressed by the Council. The very idea of him rallying others to resist their rule was intolerable. Murmurs of agreement spread across the room. It wasn't just about Marcus, it was about what he represented. A human who could unify alien forces was a nightmare for the Council. Their decision was final. Marcus had to be erased quietly, his death orchestrated to seem accidental. Exile, to a planet no one could survive, would be his fate. The Council's plan was simple but effective. They couldn't afford a public execution, not with the growing sympathies for humans among the oppressed species. Instead, Marcus would disappear, just another casualty in the far reaches of the galaxy. Marcus knew something was off the moment he received the orders. A routine reconnaissance mission in the outer sectors made little sense for someone of his rank. But orders were orders, and as a soldier, Marcus had learned long ago not to question too deeply. Still, the feeling gnawed at him. He'd seen too many comrades fall due to political games disguised as strategy. But there was no way out. Refusing would label him a deserter, or worse, a traitor. The moment his ship broke atmosphere on the unnamed planet, Marcus's worst fears were confirmed. The sensors picked up nothing, no communications, no signs of life, not even breathable air. The planet was barren, hostile, and completely deserted. His gut twisted as his ship jolted violently, systems failing one by one, alarms blaring. It wasn't a malfunction. This was a deliberate crash. The Council had set him up. The impact was brutal. Metal screeched as the ship's hull tore into the rocky ground. Marcus braced himself as the world spun, the seat restraints digging painfully into his chest. He barely managed to pull himself free from the wreckage, coughing through the acrid smoke. Blood dripped from a gash on his forehead, but he ignored it. He'd survived worse. Still, the grim realization sank in. They wanted him dead, and they'd chosen a planet where death wasn't just likely, it was inevitable. The landscape was unforgiving. Jagged cliffs stretched as far as the eye could see, while violent dust storms whipped across the barren plains. The air was thin, barely breathable, and each breath burned Marcus's lungs. He scanned the horizon, seeing nothing but endless stretches of desolation. No signs of life, no resources, just an endless wasteland. He quickly scavenged what he could from the ship: rations, water, his standard-issue plasma pistol, but it wasn't much. If he didn't find shelter, and fast, the planet would claim him. Marcus had been trained for survival, but even his experience didn't fully prepare him for the planet's hostile conditions. The extreme temperatures fluctuated wildly, boiling hot during the day, freezing cold at night. Worse, the wildlife wasn't just dangerous, it was predatory. Strange, six-legged creatures with razor-sharp claws prowled the area, their glowing eyes reflecting a primal hunger. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and had no backup. Days passed in a blur of exhaustion and survival. Marcus's military instincts kept him alive. He found temporary shelter in a cave, using makeshift traps to ward off the creatures that roamed the surface. But as his supplies dwindled, the reality became undeniable. The planet was designed to kill. His isolation deepened, and the weight of the Council's betrayal hung over him like a dark cloud. They hadn't just sentenced him to death, they'd thrown him away like a broken tool. While scavenging for anything remotely useful, Marcus stumbled across something odd, a faint energy signature buried deep within a rocky valley. It didn't match the planet's barren profile. Curious but cautious, he followed the signal, keeping low to avoid drawing attention from the creatures. What he found stunned him, a hidden enclave, camouflaged against the harsh landscape. But before he could react, he felt the sharp press of a weapon against his back. "Move!" The voice was firm, cold, and undeniably alien. Marcus slowly raised his hands in surrender, his mind racing. He was marched inside, deeper into the enclave, where more figures, alien women, tall and fierce, watched him with suspicion. Their features were striking, with smooth, scaled skin and sharp, angular eyes that glowed with intelligence and something darker, distrust. The group was led by one woman in particular. Her presence commanded attention. She was taller than the others, with a regal bearing that suggested leadership, but her gaze was ice-cold, her expression unreadable. Marcus could feel the weight of her scrutiny as she sized him up, clearly not thrilled by his presence. "Who are you?" Her voice cut through the silence, sharp and authoritative. "Captain Marcus," he replied, keeping his tone measured. He wasn't in a position to argue, and it was clear they weren't offering a warm welcome. "I was sent here by the Galactic Council." Her eyes narrowed. "The Council sent you here to die." It wasn't a question. It was a statement, and a chilling one at that. The tension in the room thickened as Marcus processed her words. These weren't just survivors, they were exiles like him. Victims of the same council that had thrown him away. But the coldness in her voice made it clear that Marcus's presence was not welcome. They saw him as part of the same system that had betrayed them. Before he could respond, Marcus felt a sharp pain in the back of his head. The world spun, his vision darkening. As he collapsed to the ground, the last thing he saw was the leader's icy gaze before everything went black. When Marcus regained consciousness, he found himself bound, his hands tied behind his back. The alien leader stood over him, her eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and distrust. "You're a soldier of the Council," she said, her voice dripping with accusation. "Why should we trust you?" Marcus met her gaze, his mind racing. The truth was simple. They had been betrayed by the same enemy. But convincing her of that? That would take more than words. Marcus woke to the harsh reality of his new existence. The ropes that bound his wrists cut into his skin, a constant reminder that he wasn't trusted here. The alien women kept their distance, watching him with a mix of wariness and contempt. He could feel their eyes on him, like predators waiting for a sign of weakness. They didn't speak much to him, and when they did, it was in short, clipped commands, as though his presence offended them. He knew he wasn't welcome, and it wasn't just because he was human. The tension in the air wasn't simply personal, it was cultural. The women were the last of their kind, their warrior race brought low by the same Galactic Council that had betrayed him. To them, Marcus was a symbol of the Council's expansion, a representative of the very empire that had likely played a role in their exile. Trust was non-existent, and their interactions were more like battles of will than conversations. Still, Marcus wasn't one to give up easily. He had faced worse odds before, and he knew that survival here depended on more than just his ability to navigate the hostile planet. He needed their help, and more than that, they needed his. Marcus used every opportunity to speak reason, to try to communicate beyond the surface tension. His tone was calm, measured, and when they would listen, he explained how they shared a common enemy. Slowly, over the days that passed, he chipped away at the wall of distrust, though progress was slow. Survival became the undeniable common ground between them. The planet, unforgiving as it was, didn't care about differences or allegiances. The dangers came in the form of vicious predators that stalked through the barren plains and violent weather that could change without warning. It was during one such moment that the fragile truce between Marcus and the alien women shifted into something resembling teamwork. The camp was under attack. One of the planet's native predators, a hulking beast with thick hide and razor-sharp teeth, charged into their makeshift defenses. Panic set in as the alien women scrambled to protect themselves, but the creature was too fast, too aggressive. Marcus, though still bound, acted on instinct. He had been trained to respond to threats, and this was no different. In a fluid motion, he grabbed a nearby weapon, a sleek alien blade, and threw himself into the fray. His movements were precise, lethal. With a combination of brute force and tactical strikes, he managed to wound the creature, drawing its attention away from the women. The battle was fierce, but Marcus's quick thinking and combat experience saved the day. When the beast finally fell, bleeding out on the rocky ground, he stood over it, chest heaving from the effort. The alien women stared at him, not with contempt this time, but with something that looked a lot like respect. It was a turning point. The leader, who had watched the whole ordeal, approached Marcus. Her expression was still unreadable, but there was a flicker of something new in her eyes. She didn't speak immediately, but when she did, it was without the usual coldness. For the first time, she addressed him without disdain, acknowledging his worth in their struggle to survive. As the days continued, Marcus found himself integrated into their group, albeit reluctantly on their part. He had proven his value, and while they still didn't fully trust him, they needed him. The planet's environment was too hostile for any of them to survive alone, and Marcus's military training had equipped him with skills they lacked. His ability to quickly assess danger, create tactical plans, and fight off threats made him a crucial part of their survival. The technology they possessed fascinated him. Despite their primitive living conditions, the alien women had access to advanced weapons and tools, stealth systems that could cloak their movements, energy-based weapons far more efficient than anything he'd used before, and medical devices that could heal wounds almost instantly. Marcus was both impressed and curious. Their resources were a testament to the civilization they had once been, a powerful and advanced people brought low by the same council that had betrayed him. Though hesitant at first, they began to teach him how to use their technology. In exchange, he showed them how to adapt to the planet's unpredictable dangers, teaching them strategies for hunting, defending the camp, and using the environment to their advantage. This exchange of knowledge slowly bridged the gap between them. The leader, whose icy demeanor had been a constant, started to see him less as an outsider and more as an asset. She remained distant, her walls still high, but Marcus could tell the dynamic was shifting. The leader's name was Rana, and as they spent more time together, Marcus noticed subtle changes in her behavior. She no longer addressed him with outright hostility, and in rare moments of quiet, they even spoke without the weight of their cultural clash hanging over them. There was a tension between them, not just from their shared struggle, but from something deeper. Marcus couldn't deny the attraction he felt, though it was buried beneath layers of caution and survival instincts. Rana, for her part, seemed conflicted. She was a warrior, hardened by years of exile and betrayal, but Marcus's presence was clearly affecting her. She admired his resilience, his adaptability, though she would never admit it out loud. In small, fleeting moments, her guard would drop, and Marcus would catch a glimpse of the person beneath the warrior exterior. She was strong, yes, but also burdened by the responsibility of keeping her people alive. Their relationship, while still built on necessity, had begun to evolve. The chemistry between them simmered beneath the surface, never fully acknowledged but ever present. They were both too focused on survival to act on it, but the connection was undeniable. In another time, under different circumstances, perhaps they would have explored it, but for now, the planet demanded their full attention. The environment wasn't done testing them yet. A powerful storm, unlike anything they had seen before, descended on the camp with terrifying speed. The winds howled, ripping through their shelters with destructive force. Debris flew through the air, and visibility dropped to almost nothing. It was chaos, and in the confusion, one of the younger women was caught in the path of the storm, trapped beneath a collapsing structure. Marcus didn't hesitate. While the others struggled to secure what little shelter they had, he sprinted through the storm, fighting against the wind and debris. Reaching the trapped woman, he used every ounce of his strength to free her, pulling her to safety just before the structure caved in completely. By the time the storm passed, the camp was in ruins, but thanks to Marcus, there were no casualties. The act cemented his place within the group, Rana, though still guarded, openly thanked him, and the other women no longer looked at him with suspicion. They had survived another trial together, and in doing so, Marcus had earned their trust, at least, as much trust as they were willing to give. The planet may have been their shared enemy, but it had also forced them to become allies, and in that alliance, something stronger was beginning to form. The alien women hadn't just been exiled to this planet by chance. Over time, Marcus pieced together the fragments of their story. They had been powerful once, a race known for their advanced technology and unparalleled combat skills. But the Galactic Council feared strength that could challenge their rule, and they had taken steps to ensure it was crushed. The women had rebelled against the Council's tyranny, but the retaliation had been swift and brutal. Entire colonies had been wiped out, and those who survived were hunted down, exiled, or worse. It wasn't just about their rebellion, Marcus realized. The Council had been quietly conducting eugenics programs across the galaxy, targeting species and individuals who displayed what they deemed dangerous potential. Humans, it turned out, were on that list. Humanity's rapid technological advancement and its ability to unite different species had unnerved the Council. This wasn't a war for power, it was about control. The Council wanted to stamp out any race that could rise to challenge their supremacy, and the alien women were one of the first victims of that fear. The more Marcus learned, the more the betrayal burned inside him. He had been a soldier, a loyal servant of a system that was rotten at its core. The Council hadn't just betrayed him, they had betrayed the very principles he had believed in. He wasn't the first, and he wouldn't be the last. The realization ignited something in him, a desire for revenge, not just for himself, but for every species that had been crushed under the weight of the Council's oppressive rule. He shared his thoughts with Rana, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of something that went beyond survival in her eyes. It was hope, but it was buried beneath layers of pain and anger. She had lost everything, her people, her home, her entire way of life. But Marcus's words seemed to strike a chord, a reminder that the fight wasn't over, not yet. There was still something worth fighting for, something bigger than revenge. There was the chance, however slim, to challenge the Council and end their reign of fear. Training became a daily routine, a mix of necessity and something else. Marcus and Rana sparred often, teaching each other techniques that had been honed in completely different worlds. Marcus's human military training was methodical, tactical, focused on precision and efficiency. Rana's fighting style, on the other hand, was raw and powerful, steeped in centuries of warrior tradition. They learned from each other, pushing their limits and growing stronger together. And with the training came a shift. It was subtle at first, small glances, moments of silence that spoke louder than words. The tension between them wasn't just about survival anymore. It was something deeper, something they both felt but didn't dare acknowledge outright. There were moments where Marcus would catch Rana looking at him, her expression softening for just a second before the warrior mask slipped back into place. Likewise, he found himself growing more protective of her, though he knew she didn't need protection. Still, the bond between them was undeniable, and the other women noticed. Marcus was no longer just an outsider. The alien women had begun to respect him, not just because of his combat skills but because he had shown them he was willing to fight alongside them. They still kept their distance, but the hostility was gone. They saw him as an ally now, someone they could depend on. It was a hard-won trust, but it was real. As their bond solidified, so did their plans for rebellion. Marcus shared everything he knew about human military tactics, the importance of strategy, deception, and choosing your battles. The alien women's technology gave them an edge, but Marcus's knowledge of warfare turned that edge into a blade they could wield against the Council. Together, they began to formulate a plan, a rebellion that would strike at the very heart of the Council's control. It wasn't going to be easy. The planet was still a constant threat, and they had to deal with more than just the hostile environment. The Council wasn't content to leave Marcus for dead. Scouts and drones had been sent to ensure their dirty work was finished. More than once, Marcus had to lead the group into hiding, using the planet's treacherous terrain to evade detection. Each encounter with the Council's forces reminded them of the stakes. If they were caught, there would be no mercy. But Marcus had no intention of hiding forever. The time for action came when they discovered a small drone station hidden in the mountains, a perfect target for their first strike. The station was lightly guarded, its purpose more focused on surveillance than defense. It was the ideal place to gather intel and supplies for their rebellion. The attack was swift and brutal. Marcus led the charge, his military precision blending with the alien women's ferocity. Together, they overwhelmed the guards and took control of the station within minutes. The victory was small but significant. Inside the station, they found vital resources, weaponry, encrypted communications, and detailed maps of the Council's outposts in the sector. More importantly, it was a morale boost. The women, who had been living in the shadow of their own defeat for so long, began to see a glimmer of hope. They had struck back at the Council, and it felt good. For Marcus, the victory was personal. He could feel the tide turning, the beginning of something bigger. But there was more to it than that. After the battle, as the adrenaline faded, he found himself alone with Rana. The camp was quiet, the others busy securing the supplies they had taken. In the stillness, Marcus and Rana stood together, the weight of what they had accomplished hanging between them. Rana's eyes, usually so guarded, were softer now. She didn't speak at first, but the gratitude in her gaze was unmistakable. They had come so far, from distrust to something that Marcus couldn't quite define. The tension between them, the unspoken connection, was stronger than ever. Marcus could feel it in the way Rana looked at him, in the way she stood just a little closer than before. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice lacking its usual sharpness. Marcus didn't need to ask what for. He understood. They had both found something they hadn't expected, a reason to keep fighting, not just for revenge, but for each other. The moment was fleeting, but it was real, a promise of something more once the war was over. Neither of them said anything more, but the silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of possibilities. As they stood there, side by side, Marcus knew that this was only the beginning. The rebellion had started, and there was no turning back now. The Council had no idea what was coming for them, and Marcus would make sure they never saw it coming. The plan was in motion. For days, Marcus and the alien women had been gathering intelligence, stockpiling weapons, and preparing for what would be their most dangerous mission yet, an assault on the Galactic Council's nearest outpost. It wasn't just any outpost, it was heavily fortified, a hub of communications and control that the Council relied on to monitor the entire sector. Taking it down wouldn't just be a blow to their authority. It would be a beacon of hope for every species crushed under the Council's heel. Marcus stood alongside Rana, reviewing the final details. The weight of the moment hung between them, heavy and palpable. There was no room for mistakes. If they failed, the Council would send reinforcements, and this ragtag group of survivors would be wiped out before they even had a chance to retreat. But if they succeeded? It could ignite a rebellion across the galaxy. That thought kept Marcus focused, despite the pressure. Rana's voice broke the silence between them, low and steady. "You know what's at stake here." She didn't need to say more, Marcus knew. He glanced at her, seeing the determination in her eyes, but also something deeper, something softer. The facade of the warrior leader had its cracks now, and beneath it, there was the same vulnerability he felt. They had come to rely on each other in ways neither had expected. The tension between them had always been more than just battle strategies and survival. In this quiet moment, with the final assault looming, they allowed themselves to acknowledge it, even if only in silence. He reached out, his hand brushing hers. It was a small gesture, but in this moment, it was everything. They didn't speak of what might come after the battle. There were no guarantees, but the unspoken understanding was clear. They would face it together, whatever it was. The assault began with precision. Marcus led the first strike, his military training blending seamlessly with the alien women's technological superiority. The outpost loomed in the distance, a fortress of steel and shimmering energy shields. Scouts had mapped out the defenses, and they knew where to strike first, the shield generator. Without it, the outpost would be vulnerable. The battle erupted as they infiltrated the perimeter. Marcus moved swiftly, issuing commands with clarity and calm amidst the chaos. Energy blasts lit up the sky, and the alien women fought with a ferocity that Marcus had come to respect deeply. They were warriors, each one capable of holding her own against the Council's elite guards. But it wasn't just brute force that won the day, it was the tactics they had honed together, the combination of human strategy and alien technology. Marcus found himself side by side with Rana during the fiercest moments of the battle. They moved in sync, covering each other's blind spots, their actions perfectly coordinated. At one point, a squad of Council soldiers advanced on their position, but Marcus's quick thinking turned the tide. He led them into a narrow passage, using the terrain to funnel the enemy into a trap. As the soldiers were pinned down, Rana unleashed a wave of energy from her weapon, cutting through their ranks with devastating precision. But the Council wasn't about to go down without a fight. Reinforcements poured out of the outpost, and the battle intensified. Marcus took a hit to his side, the impact sending him crashing to the ground. The pain was sharp, but he pushed through it, getting back on his feet just in time to see Rana surrounded. For a split second, everything else disappeared. Without thinking, Marcus charged into the fray, dispatching two of her attackers with quick, brutal efficiency. They fought back to back, the bond between them stronger than ever in those harrowing moments. Despite the overwhelming odds, their combined efforts turned the tide. The shield generator fell, and the outpost's defenses crumbled. As the final line of Council soldiers broke, Marcus and Rana pushed forward, leading the charge into the heart of the outpost. The command center was within reach, but the battle wasn't over yet. Inside the command center, the last of the Council officers made a desperate stand. The room was a chaos of flashing lights, alarms blaring, and the clatter of weapons. Marcus and Rana moved with purpose, taking out the remaining forces with methodical precision. In the final moments, as the last of the resistance fell, Marcus reached the control panel, sending out a message that would echo across the galaxy. The Council's stronghold had been taken. The victory wasn't just a physical one. It was symbolic. The message wasn't just data sent across space, it was hope. The Council's reign, once thought unshakable, had been challenged. Other species, other exiles, would hear the news. And they would know that resistance wasn't just possible, it was happening. In the aftermath of the battle, the weight of what they had accomplished began to sink in. The outpost was theirs, and the alien women moved quickly to secure the area, ensuring that no further reinforcements could arrive undetected. But in the quiet moments that followed, it wasn't the victory that occupied Marcus's mind. It was Rana. He found her outside the outpost, standing on the edge of the cliff that overlooked the barren landscape. The wind tugged at her hair, and for a moment, she looked as distant and untouchable as she had the day they met. But Marcus knew better now. He approached her, his footsteps slow and deliberate, his heart pounding not from battle, but from something else entirely. When she turned to face him, her expression was softer than he had ever seen it. There were no walls between them now, no need for the defenses that had kept them apart. They had fought side by side, bled together, and now, with the battle behind them, there was nothing left to hide. Without a word, Marcus stepped closer, his hand finding hers just as it had before the battle. This time, there was no hesitation. Rana leaned into him, her forehead resting against his, and for a moment, the weight of the galaxy faded away. In that quiet, intimate moment, they allowed themselves to be something more than warriors, more than survivors. They were just two people who had found each other in the chaos of the universe. "I didn't think we'd make it," Marcus murmured, his voice barely a whisper. Rana smiled, a rare and beautiful sight. "Neither did I." They stayed like that for a while, wrapped in each other's presence, the bond between them solidified in a way that went beyond words. The fight wasn't over, far from it, but for the first time in a long time, they had something to hold on to, something that gave them strength for the battles yet to come. The rebellion had only just begun, but Marcus knew one thing for certain: they wouldn't be facing it alone. Together, with Rana and the rest of the alien women, they would continue the fight. The Galactic Council had underestimated them, but that mistake wouldn't be repeated. The message had been sent, and the galaxy was watching. As they stood on the cliff, watching the horizon, there was a sense of quiet resolve between them. The future was uncertain, but it was a future they would face together, and that was enough for now.